Welcome everyone, Questini here with Total War Pharaoh Dynasties, and I'm going to take a look at what Creative Assembly, specifically Yolosapien, what they have changed for Total War Pharaoh Dynasties compared to the original game. This is basically the Mortal Empires or Immortal Empires mode for Total War Pharaoh combined with Troy, as well as some new factions. So, looking at the situation with the factions, you still have the Egyptian, Hatti, Canaan, Sea Peoples factions, but you now have Mesopotamia, so you get Assyria, and you get Babylon. You literally start with Babylon as a city over here. But then you also have minor factions. But first, we also have two Aegean factions, Agamemnon and Troy. Now, it's a bit weird to have Priam as the faction leader leading in battle, because that's not really Priam's whole thing, really. And I think like maybe this just reflects a part of Total War where we should be able to have a faction leader that's not leading armies, but it's actually quite important to have a faction leader to have them in battles and gaining levels. But you then have minor factions. By the looks of it, it's 5 minor factions per region. So 5 in Egypt, 5 in Hatti, 5 in Canaan, 5 in Mesopotamia, and 5 in the Aegean. Now, out of those 5 in the Aegean, 4 of them, actually all of them, are factions that are led by previous heroes or legendary lords in Troy. So you got Achilles, you got Odysseus, you've got Sarpedon, you've got Rhesus, and you have Ajax over here. Yes, Ajax is in charge of the Boeotians. Now, there's still some legendary lords or heroes that are not present. Where's Diomedes? Where is Paris? Where is Hector? Where is Aeneas? Well, for that question, Diomedes is with the Boeotians. Menelaus is with Agamemnon. So, Agamemnon gets Menelaus, Ajax gets Diomedes, Priam gets Aeneas, Paris, and Hector. So, all of the characters of Troy are now part of the Trojan faction. Notable thing is that, like with the base game of Pharaoh, you do have factions starting with higher level settlements, multiple settlements. You still have factions that do start with little, but most of the major ones will start with quite a bit of territory. In particular, Agamemnon and Priam, if we're talking about the Aegean factions. And even minor factions like Achilles does start with multiple bits of territory, so do the Boeotians over there. Now, the difference between major factions and minor factions, if we consider the situation. So, major factions have a command that they can use with a cooldown. So, you either have a passive effect or unused effect. If we look at, say, Agamemnon over here. So, he gets a command over here. And he also gets unique buildings, which is something that the minor factions don't have. Now, there are some unique faction units, undeniably so, for these factions, things like armored spearmen, as an example, or some units that, you know, other factions may not have. And this also applies to Mesopotamia over here, because you do have, like, the structures over here, you do have cavalry in this area, and people, you know what, people are unhappy, including Yolosapien, like apparently they were forced to do it. Personally, I just think like Yolosapien's intent to like historical accuracy. Let's talk about the historical accuracy aspect about it. There's a lot of things we don't know about this period. The amount of information we have about the Bronze Age is very, very limited. Yes, we know some names, we know some texts that for most part are propaganda, really, so if you want to take those seriously, I mean, we do have some accurate texts. We do have a peace tree, the earliest peace tree, the tree of Kadesh, though it's not referenced in the actual tree itself, but that's what people have taken to calling it. So it's just something important to note with respect to all of that. Hell, you can even choose to play Meneptah if you want to. Now, some things have obviously been changed, because if you look back at Troy, you had quests, you had the hero's journey, you had myth units, so all of that has been removed. A lot of uniqueness that these characters had has been removed. And some of the things that they had in terms of unique aspects has been put in terms of either ancient legacy or baseline faction mechanics or the court system. So I'm going to start campaign as Agamemnon, but first let's talk a bit about campaign customization. And I would firmly recommend people use campaign customization, because I personally find that the pacing of a campaign, too little resources to begin with, quite a few issues in that, can be a bit slow, too slow, and honestly a bit too boring. So I would recommend some level of campaign customization. I probably will do a whole video on which settings to choose from, but here's some things that are actually important from my perspective. So you now have turns per year. You can either have 1, 3, 6, or 12 turns per year. You can have an entire proper year. You can also have seasonal effects, so you can have disabled, regular, or strong. You can also toggle faction leader immortality, because faction leaders now do age. This is the way I feel about that, about the aging aspect, and they can die and be replaced. Now, the way I feel about that, I'm okay with the whole dynasty aspect, with the aging process, etc. My issue is I want to avoid a situation similar to what would happen a lot in Shogun 2, for instance, where you would basically never fight the major faction leaders, or very, very rarely would you fight the major faction leader, because they'd be killed off by other AI factions. Or you'd fight them in a battle and that would be it. I feel like some middle ground should exist on this, at least with battles. Like, aging naturally, fair enough, but in terms of like the battle situation, that's a different discussion from my personal perspective. So I do feel like it would have been good to have some middle ground option over here, as opposed to just being able to make them fully immortal, as opposed to, you know, them being fully immortal, like any battle can kill them. Because I imagine a lot of situations where these kind of faction leaders would die. You can also turn off Iron Man, though it would be nice to have some battle stat ability change. Like, you do have a couple of things, like you can change missile unit ammunition, weather severity, battle terrain severity, morale, penalties from flanking. This can be really good. And then you have lethality. So lethality is the ability for a unit to get a one-hit kill. Now, I would like the ability of switching this out more, as opposed to just like the default one, disabled or 100%, because 100% is not going to work, right? It's like really unbalanced. Disabling it is not great either, so default is better than not having it, but I would like to increase it like 25%, for instance, something like that. You can also change, you know, disable auto-resolve battles. I don't know why you would. As someone who has played campaigns, Rome 2, for instance, did Rome 2 without auto-resolving every battle, winning every battle, fighting every battle manually, I can tell you gets tiresome very quickly. You can also change various things in terms of AI recruitment, but honestly, I would genuinely just put the difficulty on legendary, and why? Because why bother? And the only thing I would change here would be maybe giving the AI some more resources. It would be nice to not just change like upkeep or starting budget, but how much resources you're gaining from buildings. Because by the way, this also applies to you. You can also get generals at max ranked or fully equipped generals. I think like with Warhammer 3, we have mods that allow you to select a level, for instance. So I think like max rank, maybe a bit too much. Lowest rank, like just rank 1, does have its own issues. So anyway, let me just load a preset that I have here. where I've changed it, and I'll do a whole video on all of this. But I'm gonna toggle the playable map area just to show the map. So let's begin a campaign as Agamemnon over here, and just let's show the starting situation for everyone. There's a new intro cinematic. I posted it on my channel. Interesting notion. The minor factions, they don't have like the icon of the lord or the character you're selecting. So if you play Achilles, your loading screen is not gonna contain him, which is weird because they already built that for the sake of Troy. Like, I understand them not doing it for every faction, but you literally had it in the previous game. Maybe they should have. Anyway, so with Agamemnon, you'll start with Menelaus, with a couple of units, some island skirmishers, some Mysian militia, some palace guards, elite Mysian axemen, more island skirmishers, and you'll start a war with Corinth. Your army is quite capable of defeating them, though be aware of the threat to Tyrians. Now, if we look at Greece, we can see that quite a few settlements have been removed over here. Like, there used to be several other settlements in this entire area. Tyrians used to be a provincial capital. So some settlements have been removed, some factions have been removed. Athens now only controls the city of Athens, and that's probably for the best, because Athens was actually an annoyance for everyone to deal with. And yes, every character now has an age, so you have Agamemnon, age 32, you have Menelaus, age 30. You can see the age of every character, like you can see Nestor, that he's 51, all of that good stuff right there. But yes, areas have been removed in Greece in general, so it's been reduced. If we look at Troy, there used to be 3 settlements here and a provincial capital right here. That provincial capital has been removed. Actually, this entire island had 3 settlements. There used to be 3 settlements right here, several others. Like, a lot of settlements have been removed in this particular area. And Troy is now just a Yolosapien province, if we're looking at it. Troy starts with Prime over here. There's an army he fights initially here, which gets removed when you're not playing Troy. I guess that's to prevent AI from losing its initial army in the auto-resolve. And you also have Hector over here, and his icon is looking unfinished. You don't have the Amazons, you don't have Memnon, you do have Rhesus, who is right here, and he actually has a proper icon, interestingly enough. You have Ajax right here, and Diomedes on this side. And then, you know, various other factions, Achilles, who apparently he's with his baseline armor, so I'm curious if we'll be able to get his unique armor that we could in Troy throughout this game. There's also been an expansion in this entire area, and also it feels like just a bit of an expansion over here just to the north of Hatti. So we go all the way to Sinope right here. It's curious to see how the, Sea People's invasion would be handled over here. And yes, certain cities like Mycenae, Troy, and even Rhesus's capital over there in Cyrrhus, they are pillars of civilization. Speaking about Troy, it starts as a tier 4 city, whereas Mycenae also starts as a tier 4 city as well. The way ancient legacy, the way legitimacy works as well has been changed to some extent. So we can see how the map is right now. Whole bunch of desert, whole bunch of nothing. It does feel like Egypt hasn't really been changed in any way. Fair enough, it is a fairly major area of the campaign map. So that has largely stayed the same based on what we can see. And then over here to all the way to the east, we have Babylon. Babylon also is a tier 4 settlement, and your army probably will start right here with an opponent to deal with, maybe that one, if you are playing them. So we have we then go into Assyria, and here's your other faction leader for the Mesopotamian faction. So we have Assyria over here, we have Babylon over here, and we have several other factions that are available in this area. So that is the map, just scrolling out there. So basically what's happened is that it's been extended to the east, all in this entire portion over here. So from Damascus, like basically from this border roughly over here, everything you see here has been extended. And then it has been extended all as well over here from this area, from these provinces basically, or from these provinces all the way to the west right here to Ithaca. That is the map expansion. That's where the factions are. The major factions, at the very least, are. Now, other changes, combat changes. Well, lethality seems to be the major one. One good thing about unit recruitment changes is that there used to be a great imbalance between the Trojan factions and the Chian factions, but now, between native recruitment as well as regular recruitment, that seems to be a lot better for these factions, because we look at what we can recruit as the Chians. You can get island club warriors, you can get a Chian bowman pretty quickly. On top of that, if we look at this, we look at the training grounds, you can get Mycenaean militia, but more importantly, we can get Mycenaean raiders. Still light infantry, but one of the things you can do in this game, and one of the things I would recommend people do, is get to a tier 3 structure as quickly as possible, so you can get things like armored axemen. So that is something that has been improved. That does feel like if you're going to play Agamemnon, you're not going to have the same issues in terms of unit roster that you would in the previous game. Royal decrees. You do start with some research over here in terms of royal decrees. Now, I've sped this up with campaign customization. It does. It's still based on the Pharaoh research tree that we had, not the Trojan one. In terms of local deities, you do obviously have the Mesopotamians, and you do have you have Egyptian, you have Canaanites, Hittites, Mesopotamian gods, and Aegean gods. Focusing on the Aegean gods, you have Zeus, Poseidon, Ares, Apollo, and Aphrodite. It still feels like Aphrodite to some extent is going to be really strong as a choice, though. Then again, Zeus's construction cost does feel like a pretty damn good choice, honestly, for shrines. Like, basically, it used to be that Aphrodite was the best by far. Now there's reasons to go for the other ones. In point of fact, the fact that Agamemnon starts with Zeus might be really, really damn powerful. Oh my, how the tables have turned. In Troy, the Trojans were too strong and the Chians were too weak, but now, well, Priam starts with Apollo, right? Priam starts with Apollo, which is nowhere near as good as Zeus early on, because minus 45% construction cost when you have a shrine, and recommendation is to build as many of these shrines as quickly as possible, is pretty damn significant. Looking at the court, here's what I don't like. There's a Mesopotamian court, and there's an Aegean court. And you don't have like an Achaean court or a Trojan court, you just have an Aegean court, which honestly doesn't really make a whole lick of sense from my personal perspective, really, in respect to that. Also, Hector is really missing a unique icon for whatever reason. I mean, that sure as hell doesn't look like Hector. But yeah, you do start with elite units in special recruitment. So that's Priam. So elite units in special recruitment are going to be these guys. Pretty powerful units. So Paragon, Swordsmen, Guerrilla, Stalkers, and 1 extra red unit. Now, interesting note about the Paragon Swordsmen. That used to be, what was it, Diomedes', one of Diomedes' unique faction mechanic in Troy. So some of that has been translated into court stuff. Others have been translated into ancient legacies. Or the power of the crown. So you do have various abilities over here with the power of the crown. I'm curious to see how legitimacy will be handled and how this entire map will play out. It used to be that basically royal powers were pointless because by the time you could use them, well, you had effectively won your campaign. Now, what's bizarre to me is because you have quite a few diplomatic options, you can even avoid the War of Troy if you want to, which doesn't feel appropriate, I feel. Like, if we look at Troy, right, over here. Yes, we don't get along, right? Past war, broken treaties, faction aversion. But minus 25 faction aversion is not going to be enough to stop that. You do have some more diplomatic options that you didn't have before. So if we, let's take a look. That's a bit too many factions, I gotta admit. But let's go with Aeolia, right? So we now have the ability of offering a diplomatic marriage, and for whatever reason, like Menelaus starts with Helen, so the Trojan War hasn't even kicked off. You can now ask for legitimacy from a faction. You can arrange a marriage, offer or get a marriage, and other things as well over here. No, although, let's just go with Ithaca. Or maybe Boeotians. No, I think maybe Troy would be just a good one to look at. So if we look at Troy from a diplomatic standpoint, you can request adoption into Dynasty for a faction if, you know, if you're king, basically. So that is a benefit over there that you do have. So you have more diplomatic options that you didn't have before. You also have a ruling family, which in the case of Agamemnon, it's a bit weird that we don't have Menelaus in that's part of this. We also don't have Helen here. Like, you know, they're brothers, so it's just a bit weird. So we don't have a scion. Our faction leader, our heir starts as at age 11. So that is a bit weird over there for that. Then we have ancient legacies for the Aegean. So for the Aegean, we get Atreus. If we look at all of this, so we get Perseus or Atreus. So in this one, I'm just going to select go with Atreus. But you can see over here, so you can complete objectives against enemy factions to gain dominance. You can use dominance for diplomacy, court, and struggles for the crown. And you can also swing diplomatic deals in your favor with that dominance. Perseus, if we look at that, actually I think I'll select Perseus. So the dominance ability is something Diomedes has. The Perseus legacy feels like a combination of what Hector used to have with the alliance he could build, so you can make this work by gaining more and more allies over here and gaining various benefits. And you can also host games for peace in diplomacy. And the more you the higher up your level, the more games you can host for peace in diplomacy. Hosting games is something that you could do you could do with Ajax. So that was his whole thing. One of the things that he had. The other uniqueness to Ajax was the ability of having a challenge, a duel, more or less, between your army and an enemy army, and you could get like a unique unit for that. That's no longer in the game, because it was involving a lot of myth units and all that, so that's not in the game. But the Aegean Ancient Legacies, there's basically faction mechanics taken from Troy, put in here. Rhesus no longer has his own unique faction mechanic because he is a minor faction, and it's a bit odd that Memnon has been removed completely. Amazons I can understand, right? Historical accuracy. Well, that's just part of it, some of the changes. Obviously, I'll dive in to talk about the Mesopotamians later on. But my personal perspective on this is I think they would have been just better suited in general with Pharaoh to focus on the mythological aspect rather than quote-unquote historical aspect, because again, we just don't know a lot of things about this period in history. There's a lot of guesswork involved. There's a lot of mythology involved, so I think that would have made things more interesting. I also find it questionable about battles, so one of the biggest issues in both Troy and Pharaoh was not the campaign mechanics, it was the battle mechanics. I don't think that's been changed nearly enough to make them interesting. Costin here, signing out.